Hi, everyone. Welcome to Journey 34. Today, I have Alex Holmes on the podcast and really excited for this conversation. Think that we can hit on some really interesting things. And I think you have a really interesting point of view on a lot of the things that are close to my heart. So, um, I would love for you, Alex, to just start off telling people, who you are. So a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, where you are, everything like that.
Okay. Thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure. I'm excited to talk to you today. Um, so my name is Alex Holmes. I am an author of the book Time to Talk, How Men Think About Love, Belonging, and Connection. I'm a student psychotherapist, so I'm in the process of my training at the moment, but I work as an existential mental health coach. So I work with the four tenets of freedom, authenticity, consequences, and responsibility as a way of as a method to working with my clients to get them to kind of own their actions, own their own level of freedom, and to find out what it means to live an authentic life, and to live a life that is to their own calling, and to their own understanding. I'm applying that to my training, which is existential psychotherapy, and and I'm a writer, and I write weekly essays on the intersections between philosophy and mental health, and I just deep thinker,
Cool.
Ravenclaw.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what else to really add about from that. And I host a podcast called Time to Talk,
Very cool.
with Alex Holmes, where I have these kinds of conversations, just one-on-one, sometimes group conversations, but one-on-one conversations, navigating what it means to be human, and talking about the transitions and the like. So yeah.
Very cool. And would you be able to just kind of clarify a little bit on how, existential psychotherapy differs from, the more traditional sense of it, or what maybe people have in their mind as psychotherapy?
Right. So I'm in the process of still trying to understand that myself, because there's no direct answer. The way I understand it is that our main struggles with life is that we have deep anxieties around loads of things that we can't control. And the way I understand existential psychotherapy, because the way I understand existentialism, and I'm a student, so I'm consistently reading around what existentialism is and who writes and speaks about it. But it is about philosophy for the modern day, to apply to life. And when I say, you work around the tenets of authenticity, freedom, responsibility, and consequences, it's about understanding that, freedom is there for you. You have that as a human being, as a human, understanding what that looks like. And then the choices that you make, you have to, understand the consequences of those choices that you make. Understand that, in order for you to live an authentic life, to live a life that is true to you, one that you can really appreciate and love, not what is conformed by other people's opinions, not what's conformed by the expectations from society on you, but what you decide is an authentic life for you. And in combining all of those things, we come together and we figure out what are the building blocks for us to kind of make new patterns, and rehashing and re-understanding what that means to be us, because each one is different. Each of us have different elements of it, and I think that when it comes to the psychotherapy part, we're working with old belief patterns and values, and we're really trying to problem solve and really look through what's been going on with past traumas and present traumas and things that's happening in people's lives. But that's as much as I can say as a student.
Yeah.
But I like using the approach in coaching, because I like getting and working with my clients to get from one place to the next. I like seeing and like empowering them to kind of be able to make the decisions that they need to make, and that's super important to me. I think that more of that is what we need.
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, something you kind of touched on there, which I've tried to wrap my head around a lot, and I talked to a lot of people about, is, the idea that you do have control over, a lot of the decisions that you make. And maybe not, you might not have control over everything external, but you have control over a lot that goes on internally. And,
Yeah.
taking the power back and, talking about that, you have the freedom to choose. One thing that I hear a lot from people is, this idea of, I feel like I have no control in my life. I feel like, there's people that are telling me what I need to do, or that there's guardrails, or that I keep running up against something. Is that something that you've run into a lot when talking with people about this kind of things through coaching? And, if so, what do you usually kind of say to them to help them break through and help them realize that they actually do have a lot more control than they might think?
Um, I think it's about understanding how to search for the answers,
Okay.
really and truly, and just kind of saying, look, this is the problem that you're presenting to me. This is what I like, if I even take myself as an example. If I'm going, I've been, I'm turning 30 at the end of this year. I keep having these existential crises around what it means to be me. I'm almost 30, and then I'm in a particular area of my life. People around me are having kids, getting married, buying new homes, starting new jobs. And I took the decision that I wanted to go and study further. So that means, I've actively taken a decision to be financially different to a lot of my friends, and a lot of family members. So my progress is slightly different in a different way, but that's about me learning how to accept that and kind of say, look, this is me and my path. I can't consistently compare myself to the paths of other people, because what does that leave me? That leaves me in a bundle of sadness and deep anxiety, because you start to then question yourself, like, am I doing anything right? Is this something that I should be doing? Self-doubt becomes crippling, and the inner critic then becomes empowered, and it starts to really sit down and say, look, this is all your fault. This is what you're doing. You made this decision. And I've been through those processes of not being kind to myself, and I've been through those elements of just saying, look, I wish I could be different, or be better, or be X, Y, and Z. And I think that it's important to sit down and really ask ourselves the questions around, what does it mean to live authentically? What does it mean to live a life that I could be proud of, and be happy to live, without the kind of obstacles and burdens that people kind of have placed on you, even though a lot of those come from us ourselves. We place them on ourselves because we carry those things. So when I'm speaking to my clients, when I'm coaching them, I just try to ask them around kind of, where did you learn that? Like, what does that mean? What would the best possible scenario be? And what would the worst case scenario be? And then what do you think is really going to happen? And we just sit down, we kind of like postulate on all of that and just try to figure out where we can go next. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do. And how I feel that I can help people. So yeah.
For sure. No. And, I think another, huge thing that resonates a ton with me is when you're talking about everybody needs to live a life that's authentic to them. Right. And I think that, like you were kind of saying, is a lot of the ideas of, I go and I call them like shoulds, of what you should do, what you should be doing, how much you should have accomplished by this age, whatever it might be. And, like I go back to the story that, my parents told me a lot of times. And it was, you kind of, you grow up, you get a job, you get married, you buy a house, you retire. And, I feel like that is a very common, theme and story that, people our age are told. And so going out there and living something that, is authentic to you and pushing against that, I think a lot of times takes a lot of courage, and not a lot of people either even see that or are too afraid to jump in and do that. Now, another thing that you touched on, which I struggle with a ton, is that inner critic. And again, I think some people are conscious to it, some people are unconscious to it. Where for me, it was the idea of perfection. My inner critic was, you need to be perfect in order to be enough, right? It really came down to like, you need to be perfect in order to be loved, to be worthy of love. And it was extremely loud in my head. And so, I think a lot of people struggle with that. And so I'm curious for you, what was some of the work that you did to start quieting that inner critic, or like that you've seen help other people?
So some of the work that I did to quiet the inner critic was I had to get into therapy. I've been in therapy for 5 years, and I had to sit down and really work with my therapist to assess whose voice it was, where it came from. And it comes from a myriad of people. It comes from primary, well, in the UK, we have primary schools. So I guess that would probably be elementary schools for you guys if you have elementary over there.
Yeah.
So primary schools, their teachers from there, secondary schools, teachers from there, friends, or people that were your friends growing up. Teenagers can be cruel, very cruel people. Parents, authority figures, things like that, critical people who have contributed to the way that we behave. Sometimes unwittingly, they don't know these things. It's not about them being malicious sometimes. And as we grow up, we hold on to a lot of these. So what I did, I went to therapy after a series of breakdowns, and I just started questioning where all of this came from and what made me believe these stories. So I'm a writer, and I just put everything down on paper. I just started journaling heavily. I started really writing out when those negative thoughts came up, what I would say to this inner critic, and I still struggle with it. I still struggle with the inner critic side of things. I still struggle with how to transition through those periods, just kind of like really that I'm better at identifying it. And I think that's probably the aim, is to get better at identifying where it is and when it comes up, and then trying to find a way to navigate around it. But I definitely still do struggle with that. And I don't think, and then, and I always get, and I think it's important to be honest about those things. There's going to be, I don't like quick fixes. I don't like, 10 ways to, correct your life or fix your X, Y, and Z. I think that we are humans, and we live in flux, and we are consistently changing. One day we may get a breakthrough on something, and then the next day something pops up to challenge that breakthrough. So we need to figure out how to be ready for when those things pop up. So the inner critic will pop up. It'll pop up at times where it's unnecessary and you don't want it to be there. It's like, for me, I wrote about the inner critic in my book, but it's funny because as I was writing my book, the inner critic popped up, because it started saying things like, can you even write this book? Is this something that you want to be writing? Are you qualified enough? Does anybody want to hear what you have to say? Will it sell? All these other things, all of this stuff as I'm writing the book. And it is a challenging place to be, but I think the important part is really understanding what it means to trust yourself. Again, another thing that is hard to do, because we're not necessarily taught to do those things. It's hard to condition ourselves to do that. But yes, that's basically what I do. And I try to model myself of people. I'll see what my idols do, and I'll be like, oh, this is interesting what you do. Would this work for me? Probably not. But it's interesting to see that we're not alone in all of this. There are people who are actively trying to make some sort of a change.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I love that because, my journey with that was very similar. And I started going to therapy and started identifying a lot of the root causes. And one of the big ones for me was also having compassion for it and learning to love that, a lot of these thought patterns and a lot of these, actions and habits actually came from a defensive place, right? And a defense mechanism that I needed as a child to keep me alive. And so learning to love that, and also learning and really accepting that I don't need them anymore. And, I'm curious, for me, I held a ton of shame about when I started going to therapy. I think especially as a man, especially, just being afraid of being seen as weak, whatever it might be. But there was a lot of shame there. And I didn't tell anybody for the first couple of years, until a couple of years in, I finally told my sister, who was the closest person to me. And, her reaction of it not being a big deal kind of shattered my world, because I thought it was going to, blow her away. I'm just curious if you had any experiences like that when you started going to therapy. Was there shame, or were you pretty open about it from the beginning?
Well, there was absolutely shame. Like, really, I kept that a secret for a long time. I think it wasn't until I was 2.5 years in,
Yeah.
maybe 3, I mentioned it to my mum. And then I slowly mentioned it to my dad like a year later or something.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, hey guys, I'm in therapy, because that's just not the way I was conditioned to be. That was not my personality. That was not what it was. But I think over time, it just became what I do, you know?
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, can you do this now? I've got a therapy session in an hour or something. And they're like, okay, yeah, okay, whatever. It's not, I had to make it less of a big deal.
Yeah.
Because you start to build this whole thing up. It's this idea that it's what we've kind of created for ourselves, these stories, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want it to be a big deal. And ultimately, people aren't that interested in other people's lives.
Yeah.
If we're being 100% honest, as interesting as you think your life is, other people have so many other things that they're interested in, and we take up such small portions of people's lives. But obviously parents, they want to be interested in their children, and well, depending on your experiences. But honestly, it's just not something that comes up often enough. And now that I'm studying and training as one, it's just a thing that I just speak about often anyway. It's just a thing, And it's funny now, because my parent, like my dad in particular, he will be watching psychological thrillers or films where the villain is a psychologist or something.
Yeah.
Or a therapist or something along those lines. And he would turn to me as the resident expert around mental health and things of that nature. And I'll just be like, I don't know. Like, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Because it's fiction. I just it's like, it's like turning around and saying, I don't know, one of those like crime procedurals.
Yeah.
And you're just saying, and you turn to an actual police officer, is like, is this what it's like in the FBI or whatever? And you're just like, no, like I can't sit here and tell you that that's what you do. Sometimes it's just very not that. So I think it's really interesting how like what people's perceptions of things are. And I guess that's why I do what I do, because I just like speaking to people about this stuff and having those kind of conversations as well.
Yeah. No, it's so funny. And actually, I remember in my first session with my therapist, the first thing that she basically said was, this is not like the movies, right? Like, that's not how it's going to go. I'm not, laying out the actual rules, and not, what a lot of people come in with. And
I'm not going to lie you down and say, tell me about your mother. It's not, it really wasn't that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I love that. And so, kind of transitioning a little bit to the book. And, so I'd love kind of a little bit of a deeper dive on specifically what it's about, and really to what made you want to write that book. And, was it, you've always wanted to write a book? Was it always that one specifically? Did it kind of come up sporadically? I'd just love to hear a little bit of that story.
Okay. So I've always written. That was my primary medium. It's the introvert's tale, isn't it? I used to just be in my room, and I used to read books and write things, and imagine myself writing a book one day, and all of these things. And books were my best friend first, and words were my community. It's so like I'm a cliche, but essentially, I had been obsessed with reading for a long time. I sometimes ask my mom every now and then just to tell me the story of me reading when I was like 5 or 4. And I would literally, I wasn't like a lot of other boys. I read a lot. I literally was inside of them. I mean, I played outside. I'm not going to say I wasn't hermetic, but I played outside. I did go and I rode my bike. I did play sports. I did all of the things. I was a well-rounded child.
Yeah.
Like if I think about it now, I played in sports, basketball, football, rugby, swimming. I did music, so I did piano, I did violin, I did saxophone, I did all of these things. I spent a lot of time reading, so I read like novels, I read nonfiction books, I read all of these things, and I was interested in like popular culture and things of that nature. So I was never somebody who was so far set apart. But then I got to a point where in my mid-20s where I've sat down and I thought to myself, what does it mean to be a man today?
Mm.
And what does it mean to be a man to me? And I started thinking about it and I was like, I just gave you, Jared, a list of all the things that I'd done growing up. I think you're equivalent to, I don't know if you have class presidents.
Yes.
I had the equivalent. We have head boy, head girl, and then we have prefects and things like that. I became head boy. I won as many awards as I possibly could. And I did all of these things. And I looked at it and I was thinking, what was I pushing for? What was this overachievement? I mean, I traveled, I got scholarships to go and to start my career in journalism. And I managed to get on that and I fast tracked my career into there. And I wanted to succeed and be the best in all the things I wanted to be. And I burnt out very quickly, had my breakdowns and ended up in therapy and kind of talking about all this stuff and questioning what it meant to be a man. And then so I started writing like loads of different little blog posts every so often. Some of them were published, some of them didn't. And I started writing and I started thinking to myself, like, I don't know what this could be, but it's interesting where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
So I started a podcast in 2018 where I started speaking to people one-on-one just about what they, their experiences with wellness. Generally, that was my thing. And then it changed slowly. It became about mental health. It became about, I started speaking to people about suicides and depression and anxiety and personality traits and burnout and panic attacks and mental health advocacy and all of these things. I started talking to people about that. And I said, there are so many men out here who are talking about this stuff to me, like, but we are told that we don't talk.
Yeah.
And then Time to Talk was born and I just started writing about that. And then, so then the book came together. I started interviewing some guys for the book. And so the book is called Time to Talk, How Men Think About Love, Belonging and Connection. And I say this every time I think about this book. It's not the book I initially wanted to write, but it's the book that I needed to write. And the book is centered around 6 man myths that a lot of men kind of find themselves trapped by. I had like a ton of myths, but there were 6 I had to whittle it down to. And that was: real men don't doubt themselves. Real men are fearless go-getters. Real men don't cry. Real men have no worries or concerns about their bodies. Real men never fail. And real men, and there's a last one, completely forgotten. It's just gone blank in my mind. Hey. Real men are lone wolves is the last one.
Yeah.
And I started really playing into that, and then the book was born out of those 6 myths. And it looks at my own anecdotes around all of those myths, and then it looks at somebody else's experiences with those myths, and then we get to the point where we are exploring the reality of what that is. So it's proud of my little book there. And the conversations I've been having about it, it's been really interesting because they inspire me. The people that I spoke to inspire me. The people that I speak to about the book inspire me. And I'm just loving what I'm learning from people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. And, I love all of those. And those are all topics that really hit close to home for me. And, kind of similarly, for myself, it really kind of, I realized how big of a deal it was when I joined a men's group and we started having these conversations and, having these men open up to you. And you look at these, I'm looking at these men, I'm seeing these strong, like, confident, like they seem like they have everything going for them. And then hearing them open up about, either planning or, attempting their own suicides. Right. And just realizing how serious of, um, how serious it is of what I kind of hear as one of the topics that goes through a lot of those myths that you just mentioned is the idea of loneliness, right?
Yeah.
Is that in a lot of them, you know, as a man, you're expected to deal with things on your own. You do not need help from anybody. Um, and I think that's where a lot of it starts from. And the one that I always go back to as well is, the only emotion that you're allowed to show as a man is anger, right? You're not allowed to show softness or be sad or cry or whatever it might be. That is um, the only acceptable emotion. And you need to always appear strong. You always need to be that rock for other people. And I'm curious, do you think that men want to have those conversations, or do you think that it's more of and it just creating safe spaces and having those conversations so that they know that other people struggle with it as well? Or do you think it's even bringing awareness to the fact that, hey, let's have some conversations about this and about these actions, about why we do some of the things that we do?
That's a very good question, Jared. I think that men, I would like to think that
Yeah.
men want to have these conversations. I don't know for sure. I can't speak for all men. Some men don't have the time to consider what that is, what that looks like. Some men just have other priorities and other concerns. But I do think it's a very important element of our existence that men do sit down and talk. I think we are the gender that needs to do that. I think that is something we've seen it across the Western world, like typically, because I can't speak for outside of Western cultures, but in the Western world, men are not conditioned to be outwardly emotional
Mhm.
and silence is, for a long time was deemed as a strength. And that kind of emotional stoicism was something that we kind of lent into, and really condition ourselves into from boyhood into manhood. I do think that there is obviously benefit in talking, and I think that when we start to think about men coming together and having conversations, we need to really create spaces that are safe enough and that inspire trust for men to have these conversations. But equally, I think that when men come together to have these conversations, there needs to be a level of understanding and desire to be met with opinions and values that do not necessarily meet yours at the same time, because that is how we forge true connections. Um, so when it comes to my age-old question as what it means to be a man today, and when I run my men's groups and I speak to the men's groups around their own certain topics, whether that be self-healing or exploring that, my whole thing is inclusivity. And I say, when we sit down as men, our experience that we have in common is that we are men. And we are all born different with different ideas of what that means, different expectations, different deliverables, but with that, what we be, but the importance is that we are respectful of one another. I think once we set down those guidelines and those those structures, we can then facilitate some real powerful conversations. I facilitated a talk on Friday, just gone, as International Men's Day, and we had an amazing conversation. It was a great panel of men and one woman, different sexualities, different races, different ages, different class brackets. All of us were just so different, but the point of that conversation was to unify under what it meant to be a man today and hold space for one another to really do that. And what I'm finding is that when we start to have this, because I know there are people that come to me and they say, oh, why do we need an International Men's Day? And why is that something? Yeah, you know, 3/4 in the UK anyway, 3/4 of the deaths by men under the age of 49 is suicide. Men have the highest rate of completion when it comes to suicide attempts, and you know, men are more likely to kind of enter into addictive or very unhealthy behaviors when it comes to addictions and drug use and alcohol and gambling and sex and abuse of others, you know, when it comes to that. So you know, we have to have these conversations. We have to be able to sit down and really find out what the element of healing is, but that has to be inclusive. Those spaces have to be inclusive and create those elements of safety for one another. And that might be super ideological, and that might be super idealistic and very unrealistic for a lot of people, but I believe that can happen because I've seen it happen on some level. And so when people say, oh, you know, why is it like, what does International Men's Day do? You know, it's just going to amplify the voices of people who are already in power. I'm like, okay, but then what about trans men? What about non-binary people who present as masculine? What about young, you know, gay men, bisexual men, pansexual men? What about disabled men? What about those men who don't have the space to do that? What about black men? What about brown men? And then you even have the white cisgendered men who just are like at the very pinnacle of not being able to express themselves in a lot of ways. And that is a society that, you know, a lot of those men are supposed to benefit from. And it's just a matter of us being able to sit in a room and identify that question. Who are we as men today? Who are we as men together? And how can we move forward? Because I stand by it. I said, I feel like once men have that conversation with men, we can go out there and we can really kind of make some real huge changes. Because all we're looking for is connection, and we're looking for love, and we're looking for belonging, and that is it. And those are the 3 tenets of my book. Those are my 3 core values, and that is where I'm at. So sorry for the long
no, that's okay,
answer,
that's great,
but it's something that I'm really impassioned about, because I want to make sure that is something that I see in my lifetime. And even if I don't, that's just what I'm driving through with.
For sure. No, I couldn't agree more with what you said there. And you know, I have a very strong belief that a lot of the hurt that we cause in others is trying to hide up the hurt that we have in ourselves. And you know, that is one thing that I really try to start the conversation around, of by healing yourself, by healing ourselves, it helps us to heal others. It helps us to put good into the world instead of evil. It helps us to take away a lot of those unhealthy or toxic, actions and traits and whatever it might be. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I'm curious for you, because it's such a hard thing, and it's seems like an abstract thing a lot of times, but, you know, talking about the idea of safe spaces, talking about, you know, how do you make somebody feel safe enough and comfortable enough to have those real conversations, to open up about, you know, these are my deepest insecurities. These are my, you know, my deep dark demons that, I've locked away, and they've really started to pop up in other aspects of my life because I've ignored them, because I've pushed them down. When I ask you that question of how do you think one can create safe spaces, whether it's for men, whether it's for anything at all, but how do you think we create those spaces to make people comfortable to have those real conversations?
I'm going to ask you that question.
Yeah, for sure.
What would make you feel comfortable
And
enough to have this conversation?
for me, it was because I never had those conversations. It was very like, again, the idea that I needed to be perfect meant that I couldn't have those conversations. I couldn't talk about the things that I didn't like about myself, the things that I was insecure about, the things that I wasn't good at. And really where it started for me was learning that I wasn't alone. And that came through the vulnerability of others. That came in, showing up to a mental health event, and predominantly centered around men, and hearing for the first time in my life another man share that he was insecure about his body. And I looked at him, I went, what are you talking about? Like, he looks fit, like he's small. Like, the story in my head was always like, oh, you're chubby, oh, you're fat, oh, you're overweight, like, you're not attractive, whatever it might be. And getting stuck in that loop of, oh, I'm the only one that feels like this, I shouldn't feel like this, which brought more shame, which made it worse. And it just kind of went into that. And so being kicked out of that habit and that cycle of feeling like I was alone, feeling like I was the only one, and realizing that other people had their own issues, other people struggled with things, and having them share about it empowered me to share myself. And so whenever I try to do that, I really try to lead with vulnerability, and, be the first one to jump in and be like, hey, this is something I struggle with, or this is a part of me that I don't like. And without putting pressure or expectation on the other person to share, creating that open space, showing them that I'm there, I'm vulnerable, and that I'll accept them, whatever they say, is really how I think about it, and what I've seen through my own experiences.
Okay. So one of the things that I learned from one of my guests on my podcast, and he basically said to me, his name has gone blank from my head, so when I'm gonna I'll find it in a moment. But he basically said, like, when we're having conversations and when we're talking, Riaz Megji, he's Canadian, so I don't know whether I don't know whether you would have known him, because he was on TV, he was a journalist. And he said to me, when we're having conversations around, what we learn as journalists, I was a journalist as well, what we learn is that in order for us to get the best possible out of another person is to meet them at a point of relatability and understanding who they are. But he goes a step further. We both left journalism and we decided to really start to connect with people on a different level. And in order for us to really bring somebody in to be able to trust us, we have to offer something up to the table. And I think that's something that's really important when it comes to men. If we think about the archetypal men's group with 6 or 7 men sitting around a campfire, like talking, that's just an image that just came to my mind. I have no idea where it came from, but it's something. And we want to talk about grief. And in that conversation around grief, it's when we point at one man and say, tell me about your grief, he's going to be like, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you mean? Tell you about my grief. Tell me about your grief.
Yeah.
And there's that back and forth. You see how that goes. But if you've got somebody in the group that says, I lost my mom, my dad, my wife, my husband, my partner, whatever, my children, my child, and it really broke my heart. And this is what it did. And this is how I felt about it. This is why it felt that way. And this is X, Y, and Z. And I don't know how to get through that. And I want to make sure that I can get through that and be the best possible person outside of that. And they're telling their story and they're really sharing. You've offered that up onto the table to then say, what about you? Do you have anything that you can share around that? Is this something that you can bring? And somebody be like, yeah, when I lost my dad, I X, Y, and Z. And you see that power in men's groups. You see that when that happens, when people start sharing about their losses and their griefs and their things of that nature. And you have to offer something up. And I think that just goes without saying in any of these, in any way that we connect, in any of these things, parent to child, friends, romantic partners, like, work colleagues, manager to employee, like, we need to, once we offer something up and we say, well, this is what I go through and I've been struggling with this too, and this is my thing, then we can have that conversation and then start to expand on that and really connect in and just say, look, I have those struggles too. I do, because it's literally what you just said earlier around the feeling of not being alone, being connected is so important and so powerful that's when you're going to get men to open up, because for better or worse, we have been told that men are supposed to do things alone. We're not meant to share any of those feelings with another person. We are meant to be the first downstairs when somebody breaks in. We are meant to be the strong people that don't break down at funerals. We are meant to hold a family together. We are meant to not be scared if we have to go out. I mean, we even saw it in The Lion King. Mufasa ran to the elephant graveyard and threw all those hyenas around like ragdolls. And he was angry with his son, but he was scared.
Yeah.
And he even died in that process of trying to save his son. So that fear, that kind of, that I have to be brave all the time, that strength all the time, it has its place, but not all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and one of the sayings that really stands out for me that I think plays into that is, bravery isn't the absence of fear. Bravery is having fear and still being able to act. And I think that's a big part of the conversation that doesn't get brought up a lot of times. It's not that you never feel fear, right? And fear comes in so many different ways and shapes and forms. And it's not trying to get away from feeling it at all. It's accepting it, working with it and working through it. But one other thing that I really want to touch on, and I know that we're getting short on time here, is what you brought up, this idea of having conversations where you can disagree, and that's okay. Right? Of, I can share my views, I can share how I'm feeling, I can share my thoughts on, one of your actions or one of the stories that you felt, or your thoughts, whatever it might be. We can disagree, and that's okay. And there doesn't need to be more to it than that. We can still be friends, we can still be connected, because I feel like a lot of times in society right now, it's very much you're on my side or you're on the other side. You're with me or you're against me, very all or nothing. And so I'm curious if you could expand on that a little bit more, of why it's important to be able to disagree and share your true thoughts without, the fear of being ostracized.
There's disagreeing with a thought process. I wouldn't necessarily extend that to disagreeing with an identity. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So we can have a thought process. Everybody, I guess we can talk about race, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who have very, very specific understandings around what it means to be a Black man, what it means to be a white man. And if I'm then explaining to you my experiences as a Black person, and in a society that has a very, very specific bias towards white people, then there's a level of understanding and compassion that I would require from somebody within that. The same way that if a man and a woman are speaking and a woman is explaining her experiences with the society that is favorable towards men, that men having a level of compassion towards women, or the woman in question in the conversation, is expected there. But I think what we need to get better at doing is having conversations.
Yeah.
And really speaking about experiences that happen. So I do think it's interesting, if we're talking about men, if a cisgendered man sits opposite a trans man and they're discussing manhood. I think that is a powerful conversation, but only when the space is held for learning and compassion. Not when you point the finger and say, you're X, Y, and Z. You're not a real this, you're not real that, or you're X, Y, and Z. You uphold X, this, da, da, da. What does that do?
Yeah.
I think that explaining where we are coming from is important. And yeah, there are times I have my moments where I'm just very much like, well, this is what the world is. And I've had my moments, definitely, this is what the world is, and people are to blame and whatnot. And I still hold those experiences and those feelings and those things. But I'm also very open to knowing that we all think differently. All of our experiences are not the same. We are all suffering in some way under whatever it is that we're here. And I wouldn't be doing what I was doing if I didn't care about where people were coming from,
Yeah.
So I think that we could just do with a little bit more compassion.
Yeah.
And sometimes a little bit of compassion and a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I said in an interview the other day as well, I said, what we're really dealing with is about clashes in values and what people have been taught by the people that they love about what it means to be them.
Yeah.
And then if I come to somebody and say, your granddad was a part of a community that no doubt probably hated my existence, X, Y, and Z. But then you probably didn't see that. That's your granddad. So you're going to be like, oh my God, like that's my granddad. Why would you say that about him? And you're going to be upset. You're going to be emotional. You're going to be like, well, no, that's not what happened. And I think that there needs to be a sensitivity. There needs to be a process. There needs to be steps to go about all of these kind of conversations. No one's perfect. People do get this stuff wrong because we are humans and we are learning how to be them. I just think it's a process.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the answer I have. There's no A plus B equals C.
Yeah.
With us, we are complex.
Yeah.
In another lifetime, I probably couldn't even articulate that. In the way that I did, and I didn't even think I articulated it in the best possible way, but I did the way I could. So
no, it was powerful. It truly was. And I think just right at the end there is one of the most important pieces is that we are all so complex. And sometimes having that empathy, having that compassion on the other side, you can never truly have it because we're all so complex, but you can do your best. Right. And I think that's, like you said, sometimes it's even just having a bit of compassion, because in so many conversations, there's none there. And it's very self-centered. It's very about me. It's very defensive. And it leads to, go ahead.
I can't, and the thing is, and that's fair, because I can't blame somebody for that. I can't blame somebody for that.
Yeah.
It's just, it's an unfortunate occurrence, but you can't blame somebody for being defensive. You can't say, oh, now you're getting defensive, that's your fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have no idea what they're protecting.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I've potentially harmed, you know? So I was just kind of like, I try to understand to that extent, you know?
For sure.
Obviously, when we are in arguments, we are just like, no, you are X, Y, and Z. And you just, I'm in a very chill state at the moment. So I'm gonna like be okay to that. But if you get to points of where the stakes are high,
yeah,
this is why I could never run for president or prime minister, because I'm too understanding. Like, oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's somebody from another. And I just be like, and they'll be like, what do you stand for? I'm like, I stand for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
No, I love that. And I think last thing I'll say on it is when especially at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, when I started to really ask questions and talk to people about it and want to learn more and truly try to understand the best that I could. The two things that really stuck with me was one, just because you haven't experienced it or seen it doesn't mean that it's not happening. And two, acknowledging somebody else's trauma does not take away from your own. And those two have stuck with me very much. And they've helped me in a lot of my conversations in everything. But just to have that compassion, to have that empathy for people.
Literally just looking at the wider picture.
Yes, for sure.
I think we've, with regards to that, there's so much going on in the world, but if you hone in on the one corner of that little bit and just say, well, this is where all the problems are, but the whole picture is the problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we need to fix the picture.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah.
Amazing. Just before we start wrapping up here, is there anything that we didn't get to touch on? Is there anything that you want to say or ask or anything like that?
Not that I want to ask, but just something I want to say. And I think that continue having these powerful conversations, Jared. Like this was a very thoughtful place. And I love the question that you asked, and I really enjoyed my time here. I think that, we should definitely have more conversations.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think there's so much more to be said around these things. We can't wrap up these things in an hour. We can't put the world to rights like that quickly. But I do think that the more conversations we have around these things, the more hopeful I feel about stuff.
Yeah,
because I think ever since the pandemic started, we've had this real struggle with hope and what hope means, and whether anybody's ever going to make it to the next bit, or what the next bit's going to look like, or the next thing. I think we've become so frightened of what's happening next that sometimes we don't even want to believe that something can. And I think conversations like this really do help me remember and remind me that there is hope and there are things that we can do, and there are conversations that we can have, and there are people that we can meet. Like we're meeting for the first time, and we're completely different time zones and completely different countries, but we can connect in that way. And we can really have those conversations. And I think that's amazing. I think that's an amazing tool, an amazing power and gift. So thank you for holding space for me and allowing me to speak with you.
Of course.
My evening, your morning.
No, thank you so much for saying that. It means a ton. And like thoughtful and is a great way to put it. And I've really enjoyed this time as well. And always love these conversations. And like you said, they're just so important. So thank you for having it with me.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you. And, if people want to learn more about you, if people want to connect with you, where would be the best place for them to do that?
You can go to alexholmes.co, That's where you will find me and everything that I do. The newsletter, the Instagram, the podcast, the contact form, everything. I would say just go there and talk to me. Instagram is my platform. It's the place where I reside the most. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not anywhere remotely near that place. But so just connect with me. Connect with me there.
Amazing.
Let's do some amazing stuff together.
For sure. And I'll link that in the show notes here. So thank you so much.
No, thank you.